Are we ready? Almost. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday, March 27th, 2024, and we'd like to welcome everyone to the board meeting. We'll call this meeting to order at 9 a.m. The teleconference number is 971-254-3149, conference ID 866-914-607#. Audio capabilities are listen only and are offered on a best effort for the public. Our meeting is also live streamed, and you can join us online by going to our website or to tctvonline.com. Click on live broadcasts. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone to mute your phones. You can do this by pressing *6. Please unmute your phone when your agenda item is ready to be discussed. For those joining via computer, please unmute your microphone and turn on your camera when your agenda item is called. All others must remain muted with their cameras turned off. Thank you. Public comment. Those intending to provide public comment to the board may attend in person or email submissions to the public comments email on our website. Public comments received by 12 p.m. on Tuesday will be distributed to the board, posted online before the meeting, and become part of the public record. You may also provide public comment virtually by registering ahead of time. To register, please email public comments by 12 p.m. on the Tuesday prior to the board meeting. Public comments can also be mailed to the Board of Commissioners office at 201 Laurel Avenue, Tillamook, Oregon, 97141. For more information on public comment options, please visit the Board of Commissioners webpage. I know we have one person registered for online comment today. Debbie, do we have any more?
I don't see her.
Okay. And do we have people in the room signed up for public comment? Okay, thank you. Well, then I'll welcome our guests in the room. Nice to have people in the room with us, and invite you all to sign the guest list. And we will start the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Scar, will you lead us, please?
Absolutely. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay. So this is the time in the agenda for public comment, and April Bailey has registered for public comment online. Give her a minute to unmute if she's with us. Okay. All right. Well, then we'll move on in the agenda. We do not have any non-agenda items today, so we'll jump right into the consent calendar. The consent calendar, these are new liquor licenses for off-premises sale applications.
Okay, and I believe we just do a motion to approve the
Yes.
consent calendar, correct?
Yes.
So, Madam Chair, I would move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes. Thank you. Okay. Item 6, please come up, Paul. Consideration of a letter of support to the Oregon Geographic Names Board to rename geographic feature Negro Jack Creek. And with us, we have Paul Levesque, board member of Oregon Geographic Names Board and the former county chief of staff.
Yes, thank you, commissioners. For the record, my name is Paul Levesque, 2995 Whiskey Creek Road in Netarts. I'm here today to seek board support for renaming Negro Jack Creek. And I'll refer to that as the N-word from here on out because it is offensive. Renaming it to Jack Creek. A little bit of background. The naming of geographic features is vested in the federal government through the U.S. Board on Geographic Names. It's made up of various federal agencies who have a toponymic interest in these features. The U.S. Board was created in 1890 by President Executive Order Benjamin Harrison. And in Oregon, and following suit, Governor Chamberlain, by executive order, created the Oregon Board. That was soon recognized as the official advisor to the U.S. Board. The Oregon Board is made up of 26 members. It is vested with the Oregon Historical Society, even though up until 19, when was it? 59. Prior to that, it was the state that administered the board, but Governor Hatfield transferred that to the Oregon Historical Society in 1959. So I was appointed by Chet Orloff, who was in 1999 or 2000, I can never remember, was the executive director of the Oregon Historical Society. As I say, it has 26 members who represent various areas of the state with interests in history, either professional or amateur, which I am an amateur historian, as well as geographers, public outdoor writers, professors of various degrees. And there are 12 advisors made up of state and federal agency members who have an interest in geographic names. Currently, Bruce Fisher is the president, and Doug Decker, who I think everybody knows, is the vice president. So the matter before the board today involves the creek that we are seeking a letter of approval to rename to Jack Creek. The history, well, the location is in Siskiyville. For those of you who don't know, it is up the Wilson River. It is a creek tributary to the Wilson. The dominant landowner is the Department of Forestry, and as it approaches the river, there are a number of private owners who adjoin the creek. Apparently, Jack was a black man who lived there in certainly the early 1900s, if not the late 1800s. Despite monumental search efforts, we've been unable to determine his history or his last name. In an ideal circumstance, one might consider naming the creek after his last name if we knew it, but we don't. And so the way this came about is that a gentleman from Hillsborough named David New submitted an application for the renaming to the U.S. board. Well, the U.S. board sent it back to the Oregon board because in Oregon, we supervise renaming of geographic features and make a recommendation to the U.S. board. We have no authority to actually name a geographic feature. So he lived in a little cabin behind the store. He got a grave illness and suffered alone until his death, and he was buried behind his cabin on the property. The first indication or history we have of him was written by Helen Rear, who was Jim Rear's aunt, you may know from Rear's Camp. And he wrote what was going to be a family history, but it was unfinished. And it talks about the ride up the Wilson River, and she mentioned this brief history that I just gave. So we have letters of support from the Oregon Department of Forestry, signed by Kate Skinner, the local district forester, as well as the Pioneer Museum. So if the board has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Commissioner?
Thank you, Commissioner. Good to see you again, Paul. No, I have no questions. I do know there are a number of other creeks. I can think of one in particular on the Little Nestucca River that had an offensive name. I believe it's been changed, as of others. And while I'm not necessarily a proponent of changing just for change's sake, there are things change as time passes, and I think this is a good thing. So I absolutely support what you're doing, and I appreciate the historical nature and what you've done to dig into it, because to me, history ends on about the 5th page when I fall asleep. So to have someone like you that can go back and bring forth these details is a good thing. So I certainly will support it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with my colleague, and thank you so much for the history. It's so much deep, rich history in Tillamook County that I think many of us just don't know. So I appreciate the historian that you are for bringing it forward, and I appreciate their letters of support. This is going through all the proper channels, and it absolutely makes sense to me.
Thank you.
Likewise, as it does to me. Thank you for your work in this matter, and thank you for Kate Skinner's support in this matter, and I'm fully supportive.
Madam Chair, in consideration of a letter of support to the Oregon Geographic Names Board to rename geographic feature Negro Jack Creek, I move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes. Thank you,
Thank you.
Paul.
Thank you.
Item 7 is consideration of modification number 1 to professional services agreement number 6410 with PAE Consulting Engineers, Inc. for the Tillamook County Fairgrounds Electrical Service Upgrade Project. And with us, we have Cami Von Segern, manager of the fair. Good morning, Cami.
Good morning, commissioners. Yes, so this is a pretty straightforward agreement. We had already contracted with PAE to do all of the electrical and engineering and design work for the power project that will be starting here this next month. This is just an extension of that so that they can correspond with the Farnham Electric company who had the actual contract for the work done. So this will allow them to talk and go through the project, answer any questions, or do any modifications that might be necessary along the way. So it is for an additional $9,273, and it will extend their contract period through December 31st of 2024.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions?
Thank you. No, I'll just comment that, as we mentioned, I believe last week, there's quite a bit going on out in that part of Tillamook County and here in the middle of the county. The improvements at the fairgrounds, of which this is a part, things happening at the college, and then there's also some other physical improvements on drainage and sanitary sewers and so on. So this is just another small step in what is going to be a pretty significant change to what goes on in that part of our county. So absolutely, I'm in support. Let's get it done.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And I agree. This is exciting. We've been kind of waiting and I know you've been plotting and planning for a long time to get this work done, and it's really exciting to see it happen, and I'm in full support.
As am I. Thank you, Cami, for shepherding this project along, and I think we're all just really happy that it's happening and we're moving forward. So thank you. I think we're ready for a motion.
Madam Chair, in consideration of modification number 1 to professional services agreement number 6410 with PAE Consulting Engineers, Inc. for the Tillamook County Fairgrounds Electrical Services Upgrade Project, I move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you, Cami.
Thank you so much.
Item 8 is consideration of intergovernmental agreement number 662 with the State of Oregon Department of Corrections for Measure 57 Program Services. And with us, we have Lieutenant Ani Seaholm from the Sheriff's Office. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. So this is a grant that we get through the state of Oregon for justice-involved individuals that we supervise that are drug addicted and then also have property crimes. So this was presented to LIPSIC and then also brought forth for review when we did our biennial plan. This is an additional like 70. Right about 74,000, and it'll go to supervision and then supplies for UAs, sanction costs. We also have like carry guides and cognitive thinking groups that we're going to work on starting as well with this.
That's great. Thank you. Commissioners?
Thank you. I have no objections whatsoever. This is, as I take it, an extension or a part of what you brought before us before in terms of what has to be done when you bring someone in custody and so on. Is that correct?
So that this would have been, this is part of our overall biennial plan. So this is a piece, it's just a separate grant. So it's tied into all of our other funding sources. But I think, I'm not sure if we're talking, or if you're mentioning like Justice Reinvestment Grant, but this kind of ties into all of that as well, as far as for our programs and stuff, and supervision of the justice involved individuals.
Thank you. That's what I understood. In other words, this is something that's almost a requirement based on who you bring in and who needs to be checked and so on. In other words, it's fairly routine and it's outside money that comes in for this purpose.
Yes, and we've had this grant, I want to say this started in 2009. So it's been an ongoing grant that's been tied into our biennial plan. Yes, so we reapply for each biennium, and then it gets put into our biennial plan with our other grants, so our grant and aid, and then our justice reinvestment program and our behavioral health court grants, and presented in one full packet.
Okay, thank you. No, I'm good with that, Madam Chair. Let's keep moving on this one.
Yeah, and I agree. And we say it every time you come in front of us, Ani, but I don't think we can say it enough. The work that your department does is so critical. It is helping people get on their feet again. It's helping people be successful. There are folks who make mistakes. They end up going through our criminal justice system. And when they come out the other side, they go to you and your team to help them find the right footing and go forward. So this sounds like it's a really, really important function, a piece of what you do in funding to do that. So thank you. I am in full support.
As am I. And thanks for being the grants manager. You do a lot of work on grants and bring in a lot of revenue that's essential to the function of your department. So thank you for that work. I think we're ready for a motion.
Okay. Madam Chair, in consideration of intergovernmental agreement number 6629 with the state of Oregon for corrections for Measure 57 program services, I move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes. Thank you. Item 9 is consideration of an agreement with Axon Enterprise, Inc. for unlimited evidence storage for the District Attorney's Office. And with us this morning, we have Tillamook County District Attorney Aubrey Olson. Good morning.
Good morning. I was thinking I was number 10, so I thought I had one.
Oh, that's all right.
Thank you for having me this morning. I did last minute decide to create a short presentation. It's my understanding from Christine, my wonderful office manager, that you're supposed to sign up for that when you sign up for your agenda item. And she did that for me. So, but I did, it's basically 4 slides of images of what we work with. So you all can, because I can explain
Yeah.
all of this, but unless you can
Oh,
visually
let's look
see
at it.
So I sent Ms. Garland an email as we were sitting here. So she probably hasn't seen it yet, requesting either a Teams link so I can log in and share my screen. Or I also sent her a PDF if she wants to open it and bring it up, whatever's easiest.
She's
but-
looking for it in the back. I can see her head moving.
So while she does that, I don't mind. So what's going on is 2.5 years ago, it was October of 2021, we adopted a system called Carpel, Prosecutor by Carpel. It has been game changing. It has brought us into this century as far as our case management goes. Prior to that, we were strictly paper files. I think we were one of the last district attorney's offices standing that did not have some sort of digital file management system. How we have survived the years of living in this building with no fire to destroy all of our files is a mystery to me. We do still have quite the cache of paper files because what we did is we said hard switch from this day forward is October 1st of 2021. From this day forward, we are creating only, there it is, we are only creating digital files. We will not be creating new paper files. And so there have been a handful of files We have a lot of cases that are in warrant status that maybe they never really got any action, just a very small file. When those have surfaced, we have scanned them in and digitized them. And there have been just a couple of monster files that we said, we're not carrying around this monster file on an active case that we did digitize. But for the most part, old files live in paper file form. Part of the reason for that is many of them will be purged as time goes on, as they meet the retention schedule per the Secretary of State. We do have some that are those forever retentions that it is on our list to eventually upload. So that's a little bit of a background where we're at. So one of the biggest features of Carpel is the ability to share discovery. And when we say discovery, it means that we're required by law that pretty much every piece of evidence, every item we receive from the police or witnesses in a case, we have to share that with defense counsel. We don't play a game of poker. We don't hide the ball. We just, we joke that we play two-sided cards. They see our whole hand. We don't keep anything from them. We have to share it all. And in recent years, the amount of discovery has drastically increased. And in our paper file days, I meant to grab a paper file and bring it down with me just so I could show you. But what we would do is our legal assistants would stand at the copier and copy all paper files and literally stand there with a highlighter. And as they would feed through, they would mark them on the corner, because the idea is that the little highlighter marks didn't show up on the copier. And that way we would know when we were sitting in court and the judge would ask, have you submitted all of your discovery? I could flip through it and see those little marks. And I would know this has been discovered. For digital discovery, photos, videos, the like, everything was on a disc, and we had a little file inside of our file with all those discs, and they would have the appropriate markings from staff. And we do have a big tower for copying discs. It's actually terrible. Our previous IS director, Damien Lavalette, hated that we had any discs at all. Because when we switched over to Carpel, that was a big concern, is how do we store all of this digital discovery? The discs don't actually preserve those files for long term. And we've had many, many errors where you go to open a file that's been around for a while, the discs don't work, they're corrupt. And a lot of times you try to get that evidence from police. Well, they don't have it anymore either, or they stored it on disk. Now it's lost. And it's very problematic for our criminal cases. It can result in discovery violations, which the harshest remedy for a discovery violation is a dismissal of the case with prejudice, which we don't want, especially in some of these more serious cases. That's just sort of a big slap to everyone involved, especially the victims of the case. So with Carpel, one of the biggest draws to that is they integrate with something called evidence.com, which is the Axon portal. And in the last 3 years, what we've seen is all but one agency, law enforcement agency in this county, has started using the Axon recording software, body cameras, dash cameras. I'm going to back up, get a little bit of a history lesson just so you get a grip on it. In 2019, we saw that's when I started working here, we saw some body cam footage. Mostly it came from the state police, fish and wildlife troopers. They had body cam because they were the ones out in the field away from their cars. Otherwise, the patrol guys had dash cams. City PD had I think a couple of their cars were outfitted with dash cams, and they had some sort of body camera system. We would get some video in some cases. Manzanita PD had no sort of recording device. They would occasionally bring out their cell phones when they would be in the middle of an interview and realize, oh, this is important, I might want to record this. And they'd take their personal cell phones and just record it, excuse me. And sheriff's office, well, that was just a disaster. The software they had body cameras that worked some of the time with limited battery power that would occasionally, most often, cut off in the middle of whatever they were doing. That we'd get cases where it's like, where's your video? Did you not record this? They're like, well, I knew I'd only have about an hour worth of video time on my shift. And so I was hoping not to have to use it in case something bigger came out. And so more often than not, we had no video from the sheriff's office. Since 2021, we've seen all but the state police get on board with Axon products. The state police has a service, or they use a product that's under the, I believe it's called, no, it's now WatchGuard. It was Coban. I think it's WatchGuard now. And they do have their own proprietary system for uploading that video onto the cloud. One of the big things about the Axon products is they store all of their digital video to the cloud. So Manzanita, the sheriff's office, they have body cams. City PD has dash cams and body cams. And then OSP sends us their stuff. They have to send their stuff by disk just because of issues we've had still with the state police and getting access to their cloud storage. That's a different issue altogether. But what we've seen is out of the 4 agencies who typically submit evidence to us, the primary submitters are City PD and the sheriff's office. They are probably, I'd guess 80%, would you say 80% of our files? And with the amount of video we are now getting, it is probably quadrupled or more since 2021. So how that's important to us is, and this is where my my screen comes in. As you see on the screen, so that is what our Carpel site looks like. That's I've had to redact. That's a live file. It is a closed case, but it is a real file. So what you can see on there is, I mean, that's my screen. I made a screenshot of that yesterday. And if you notice that on one of those tabs, it says evidence.com, it's highlighted blue because that's the tab that's open. There's only 2 files in that one. And those are just paper files. And as you see, the boxes on the left are checked and there's a button that says send. So in order for that to happen in that case, what would happen is the sheriff's office in that case uploaded their report. They uploaded any video they had, and that in that particular case, they didn't have video, but if they did, and in some of our bigger cases, that list is extremely long and scrolls down. Thousands of files in some of our cases. Every single photograph, the data that goes with those, all of it. And for our staff, all they get emails when the sheriff's office uploads their evidence to, or one of these agencies uploads their evidence to that site, and they share it with us just by the way the contracts work and the way the system works. If you are a law enforcement agency and you use the Axon product and you're uploading to their site, which is called evidence.com, then you get an automatic share with your DA's office. And that actually does give us storage. So once they link us to the file, they share it with us, we now have our own login. And I'll show you that in a second, where we are able to access those files. But Carpel and evidence.com or Axon integrate with each other. And that was a big feature that was, part of why we went to this, is we knew the agencies were going to this platform and we would have this integration. For our staff, all they have to do is enter the report number where you've got the referral box in the middle of the screen on the left. They just enter that report number and hit update down on the bottom right. And everything that's been uploaded into evidence.com for us populates into our Carpel. And then they check what they need to check and they hit send, and it just sends it to Defense Counsel. It generates our discovery invoices, because as you all remember, we do actually charge for our discovery. So it generates that invoice for us, and it makes a very simple process for our staff that would otherwise be cumbersome. And it also allows us to see it, us, the attorney. So a lot of the things with some of these platforms is we joke that they need to be attorney proof. We need to be able to easily understand what's going on with it. And a lot of times this is because we're in court, we're moving fast. If I'm in a court proceeding and we're in the process of possibly setting trial or discussing what's going on with the case, the judge wants to know, has discovery been sent? Have you done your job, Aubrey, is basically the question. And I can quickly look, and if you see on the far right of that screen, it says downloaded in that evidence.com section, and there's a green plus mark. That's all I need to see. I can see that plus mark and go, yes, Your Honor, I've sent all the discovery, and I can see that they received it. If you hover over that mark, it'll show you who downloaded it and when. If it hasn't been downloaded, it'll have a red check mark or a red question mark, showing that we sent it, but they haven't downloaded it. And we can have a conversation about that. If there's nothing there, I can say, oh, it looks like we haven't sent something. So the thing is with this contract, what has happened is apparently Axon has been overwhelmed with the amount of agencies, district attorney's offices. They also have Carpel has a defense attorney site, Defense by Carpel or something like that. And so apparently in the last few years, everybody's been coming on board and they've been overwhelmed. And so they notified us recently that this integration used to come just within our contract with Carpel. Now it's extra at the tune of, what's the total cost? I didn't bring I have,
It's about 34.
Yeah, what we have is 34,446, and it looks like it's a 5-year agreement. Each year,
Correct.
it's 67.
I just remember the first year is like $6,400 and it's
Yeah.
a 4% increase each year over 5 years. There is a clause in the contract that if we don't get approved for funding in our budget cycle, that we can cancel the contract at any time with no penalties. So that's, that is a good thing. So we're not on the hook for the whole 34,000 right up front, just the 6,400 for the first year. It does sting a little bit because this is a process, this is what we've been using, this is what we've been doing, we're sold, we're bought in, here we go. And now they're charging us for it. And so Christine and I have been really putting our heads together of what does it look like if we can't have this? Because we now rely on this heavily. And if you'll scroll down, Ms. Garland, so I can show them what so that's what the evidence.com dashboard looks like. And so basically what would happen if we did not have this system is my staff would have to independently log into this website because we still get access to the files they share with us. It just doesn't, the cost is to integrate it with our case management system. So our staff then would have to log into this site and they would have to then, if you'll scroll down, I believe one more. Thank you. Then they would put in the case number they're looking for and it would bring up various pieces of evidence. This is just one example of the case I showed you in Carpel of where the report is. So they would then click on open this report. We would have to basically, I think we can discover it out of evidence.com directly. So there is a way that our staff can send the files from this site to Defense Counsel. But they would have to then manually go into our Carpel case file to document and generate invoices. And the other option would be to download all of the evidence from evidence.com and then upload it into our Carpel site and discover it through the Carpel site. That would result in, we would need to probably increase our storage with Carpel, and they charge $500 per terabyte. We currently have 2 terabytes available to us, and we're using 0.06 terabytes of our full storage. We do not store any digital evidence in our Carpel case management system. We have relied on evidence.com storage capability for that digital media. In a meeting we had a couple years ago with when this was really going and we were trying to figure out all the intricacies of, it was before the sheriff's office came on board and we were still getting discs. We were trying to figure out how do we store these discs? How do we discover these discs? What do we do? Because we realized that uploading all of these digital files to Carpel doesn't work. It bogs down the system. It's way too slow. You can't play the files from the system. You can't view the video, the photos. It just really slows down and drags down the system. So what we would end up doing is having to download it to our computer to then view it, watch it, put it on a disk to share it, whatever. So we realized that that just didn't work very well. So if we did that, it would only be for really sharing it, discovering it, maybe not so with long-term storage. So basically what we have is if we don't integrate, we end up with, I consider it like a dual file system because we would have access to everything in evidence.com. It does become our file once it's shared with us in this platform. But it would take our staff time. We've estimated 3 to 4 times what they're currently spending to discover as they do with their current process. They are fully tapped with, we have well, Christine is an office manager / legal assistant. So in a perfect world, her only attorney that she has to do legal assistant work for is me. And we have 2 legal assistants who each have 2 attorneys. So with the amount of digital evidence we receive, because that has increased so much, the workload for them to have to go back to a system or it wouldn't be going back. I can't even call it back because it's not going back to a paper file. We would have to incorporate a new system managing 2 files, having to manually input all this information, manually discover. We estimate 3 to 4 times the workload, which would result in us coming to you asking for a minimum a part-time position for someone who could be a discovery clerk for us. So comparing what it would cost, those are the options. When we have a contract like this, we have to get quotes or compare, are there any reasonable options? We were trying to figure out what we could get for other quotes or how does this work? And we just couldn't find any other system. Carpel's, we reached out to Carpel. They don't integrate with another system like evidence.com. And even if they did, then it would require the sheriff's office and other agencies who use the Axon products to then upload their software or their evidence to another platform that could then integrate with Carpel. The other option is to ditch Carpel and go to another system, but there's not another system that integrates with evidence.com. You would have the same problem with our agencies having to upload twice. So it's going to create extra work on someone, whether it's the sheriff's office or us, or we pay the fee and we integrate and we keep moving as we've been moving. So those are pretty much the options that we've come up with. The other problem, which makes it not a reasonable option to go with Carpel or to switch out of Carpel, is we've spent the process of getting Carpel was expensive. I believe it cost us, what was it, $27,000 a year for 2 years to start, and then we have our annual fee to maintain that. That's the actual cost in dollars, but it doesn't factor in the cost of our learning curve, which has been huge. We have a team, our administrative team is 4 people, but it's really mostly Christine and myself who've had to really figure out the nuts and bolts of Carpel and make it fit to our specifications. It's not like Microsoft Word where it's just, this is how it works, learn how to use it. It allows us to build it how we want it. So we've spent countless hours learning it, building it, and teaching our team how to use it. To have to switch to another platform, to me, is untenable. I don't think I'd do it. I'd be like, we're going back to paper files. I'm not doing that. Problems with every option. So we decided there is no other option that would be reasonable for us other than this. So that's where we're at. I think I covered everything.
Thank you. Thank you. As your liaison, I just want to affirm that this is essential to the function of your office. And I recall vividly when the previous DA came to us to talk about the original Carpel contract and said, we are ready to bring the DA's office out of the dark ages of paper file into an electronic system. And we fully supported that. I'm with you on being frustrated that you've been using a service that you've become dependent on, and now they're charging for that service. That's very frustrating. But I agree that there is no viable alternative. So I am fully supportive of this contract, and sorry we have to pay for it. But clearly, I think, I'm not going to speak for my fellow commissioners, but I believe that we're all committed to efficiency. And I don't see how you could live without this at this point. So I'll
I
let
do have, if you don't mind, 2 points on that I meant to bring up. One is that it has been proposed in legislation over the last couple of years. There was a big kerfuffle, I think 2 years ago, over discovery fees, because that is one benefit, is we have always been able to charge and we are able to pay for these programs through our discovery fees. So it really doesn't come out of the general fund. It comes out of our law enforcement fund, and we charge defendants for the discovery. We did come last year to update our discovery fees because we realized that it wasn't matching. Our discovery fees were based on our old paper file discovery system. And we did a preliminary update knowing we would have to come back after really diving. Christine and I need to do a deep dive to figure out exactly what we need to do, and being consistent with other district attorneys' offices throughout the state. Another thing is that the legislative efforts from defense teams, they are demanding digital discovery. I don't know that going back to any sort of paper file system is even a viable option. I know that it was on the table a couple of years ago in the legislative session to require it, but it fell flat. And so, but they're wanting that. And so it is integral to our office function. We have to have it.
Yeah, I think we all hear that very clearly. So thank you, Aubrey. I think we hear that very clearly. And you know, it's what we've been asking department heads across the county to think about as our budget continues to be tighter is how do we be more efficient? And this is 100%, you know, making your office more efficient without question. So I absolutely am support. I think it's a direction that we cannot afford to go backwards. We must go forwards.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. It sounds very much like a reasonable plan for sure. My main question, you touched on the cost, and I'm not sure where that is relative to what you were paying. And I appreciate the fact that many organizations, companies get you hooked, so to speak, and then kind of throw another cost at you. And that's sort of how a lot of things are done. What is the backup? Is there a separate backup in the event of something? And you mentioned that we've gone all these years without having a fire or a flood or something terrible here in the courthouse. And I would agree, because a lot of places have lost considerable records due to something like that. Is there an electronic backup that's separate and apart from all of this?
Do you mean for our current?
Well, for the
paper file
whole
storage,
system.
or-
In other words, let's say something happened to this provider and you or both. Is there another third party that's holding something elsewhere electronically that could be restored, everything except maybe for a 72-hour period or something like that?
We do rely on the vendors for that backup. I know Carpel has told us many times, you know, with the cloud-based service and where their servers are located and what their backup plan is, but we don't individually have our own. We rely on the vendors to make sure that they are adequately, and that is part of the contract, as I understand it, that they are in charge of making sure that these files are in fact backed up appropriately.
Are they, I don't know this name, are they a publicly held corporation, you know?
That is a great question that I cannot answer at this time.
I'd be curious only because things happen and companies get bought out and things change and the dynamics change. And, you know, this is in my mind, a critical part of what you do and how you do it. And if it were compromised in some fashion, that wouldn't be good for anybody.
I will say that these companies they are required to follow CJIS security policies, which are very stringent. So that was one of the biggest questions we had, because this is web-based and there are major concerns with CJIS security when there's anything web-based. I mean, I can't even that's why I had to black out certain things just to show,
Sure.
you know, in a public meeting, and it basically even if it was a private meeting, if you're not CJIS cleared, I can't show it to you. And so very strict. I can't even send that stuff by email without encrypting or following certain protocols. So I do know that much, if that helps.
Last question. Is this widely used elsewhere in Oregon and even across the country?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It is the premier. Carpel and the Axon products I would say they are the premier services being used.
Okay, thank you. I'm good.
Thank you. I think we're ready
Okay.
for a motion.
Madam Chair, in consideration of an agreement with Axon Enterprise, Inc. for unlimited evidence storage for the District Attorney's Office, I move approval.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, for your time.
Okay, moving on to item 10, we have consideration of a professional services agreement with Capital Asset and Pavement Services, Inc. for a pavement management program update, re-inspection services, and digital imaging of Tillamook County roads. And with us, we have Chris Lady, the Director of Public Works. Good morning, Chris.
Morning, Commissioners. So since 2008, this capital assets and pavement services have gone through and they've inventoried our paved roads every 2 years. There's two services they provide. One is the inspection that generates the paving condition index, and with the inventory that's gives all of our asphalt roads a scale from 0 to 100. When we first started doing this, we were ranked 36 out of 36 Oregon counties, and by far we're the worst ones in the state. We've used this information to help develop. It's not the sole item, but we do use this to help develop our paving plan. Try to improve it. Where's the best opportunity, best location to put money? Dedicate money into paving. The other service with this is the same company goes through and they video record through photos. So they'll take a photo every so many feet of all the paved roads in the county maintained paved roads, all the way back to 2008. And this is significant savings for us, because if somebody comes up and says your paving caused this damage, which has happened several times, I pull up the video or I pull up from 2010 and say, no, that damage has been there 10 years before we even showed up to this site. It also saves a considerable amount of driving time. If I have to go up to look at Falcon Cove, that could be, half a day's worth of my time. So really quickly, it pays itself back. So looking for approval for this contract.
Thank you, Chris. As the previous liaison to Public Works, I can say that it's a really important function, and you've shown me the pictures of the conditions of roads over the years and I can see how it's clearly invaluable. My question is, is this part of the ranking that we end up with to see how good or bad our roads are compared to other county roads in the state? Oh, you're muted.
This is this is the end result of this. So it's not part of it, it is. So it's an independent outside third party that goes through. They rank most of the counties in the state, as well as in California and in Washington. And it's an Oregon-based firm.
I recall when Tillamook County was ranked as having the worst roads in the entire state. Do you remember, or do you know where we're ranked now?
We're approximately in the middle of the ground. We rank around 50%. We really want to be a lot higher, but we're working on it. We need to stop having disasters so we can spend money not on disasters but on paving.
Right. Well, 50% is way better than 36 of 36. Commissioner?
Well, thank you. As the current liaison to the road department, I'm quite impressed with what they do, particularly with our most recent disasters. There were solutions up and coming as quickly as it could be made. I remember the 36 ranking where we were last. And that was the one of the principal points that we pointed out when we worked on the road bond about 10 years ago, $15 million road bond, was that we were dead last. And I suppose that helped pass it. So maybe the next one might be a little more difficult if we're halfway there, but we shall see. So no, I'm in support of this too. It's a good service. And what Chris pointed out, if people complain, since I became a commissioner, I'm getting fairly frequent emails of what are you going to do about the pothole in front of my property? And sometimes they can be fixed, sometimes not. But this is a good piece of historical data as you roll forward, that things are not always as they seem, and there's sometimes another answer to the question. So this is a good service. Let's keep it going.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important. I've also had Chris show me some of the pictures, and it's really enlightening. It's very, very helpful to see how the roads across the county actually look. How are they actually, what is their condition? Not what somebody said, but what's on the ground there. So it's an important service, and I'm pleased that we have moved from 36 up to somewhere in the middle. And to Doug's point, we are halfway there. So our next bond will probably be, can we get the rest of the way there, right? So it's an important service, and I'm in support.
As am I. So I think we're ready for a motion.
Madam Chair, in consideration of a professional services agreement with Capital Asset and Pavement Services, Inc. for a pavement management program update, reinspection services, and digital imaging of Tillamook County roads, I move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you, Chris. Item 11 is consideration of a contract for general services with Don G. Averill Recycling, Inc. for the hauling of municipal solid waste, yard debris, and other materials from the Pacific City Transfer Station to the Tillamook Transfer Station. And with us, I believe we have Justin Weiss, Interim Program Manager of Solid Waste.
Morning, Commissioners.
Good
morning.
morning, Justin.
Good to see you all. So yeah, this is our contract for hauling waste, yard debris, metal out of our Pacific City Transfer Station. The contract was fulfilled by Don G. Averill Recycling five years going back, and so we're up for renewal. The rates have gone up a little bit in the bid submitted. There are two options within the bid. There's an option for hauling one bin at a time and also hauling two at a time. Hauling one bin went up from $259 to $269, so a $10 increase there. And the cost to haul two bins went up from $464 to $504, so a $40 increase there. Because of the close proximity between Pacific City and Tillamook, relatively, a lot of the hauling is one at a time. It does take more effort to hook up the two, and it just doesn't make sense unless they're long hauling. So most of the hauling will be at the $269 rate. The contract, I believe, allows for up to 5 extensions of the agreement. So that would give us 5 years of hauling out of Pacific City. And Don G. Averill has done a great job hauling and operating the Tillamook Transfer Station. So I would recommend that we secure this contract and continue to move the garbage from Pacific City to Tillamook, where it eventually goes to its eventual final recycling spot for scrap metal or the Coffin Butte landfill for garbage. So yeah, happy to answer any questions if you do have any.
Thank you, Justin. Commissioner?
Thank you. Well, that's also one of my areas of responsibility as a liaison. So I've attended now a number of their meetings, and I can tell you that these decisions are not made without some considerable debate and input. It's a fairly large group. They meet regularly. I believe there's a couple or 3 vacancies currently, and that we're in the process of refilling those. But you just don't come in and say, how about we do this or how about we do that? There's considerable thought and considerable evidence and history. And this is a group that is a strong, much like the Fair Board. They're hands-on. They're actually, some of them are working day to day in the cycle of recycling. And so they talk about it. They know exactly what they're talking about. They know what their costs are. And as we all know, costs are not generally going down on much of anything. And so to move this under a successful system, to me is, again, almost a no-brainer. Keep it going, even though it costs a little more. I guess I would say what doesn't cost a little more these days. So yes, I'm very much in support of this.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, I agree. Everything costs more these days. And, I think we obviously have to keep our recycling and our trash moving. Some related question. I was in a meeting recently with commissioners from across the state talking about the life expectancy of the Coffin Butte landfill. And they were saying that somewhere in the next 5 to 7 years, that landfill may very well close, be at capacity and close, and whether or not we had start looking at what comes next for us. So I realize that's sort of an off the cuff question, Justin, that may not be fair to ask, but I said, well, that's a great question. Next time I see Justin, I'll have to ask. So are we looking into that future?
That's a great question, Commissioner Scar. So yeah, through all my schooling and past jobs, that's always something that's a big conversation. Landfill space, are we shipping it out of state? And so that's definitely something as I'm approaching my year in the interim position as program manager, learning the budgeting process and doing all that. I'm hoping that year 2, if I do stick around, and I do hope to, that we can start looking towards the future. In 2025, we're going to have the RMA enacted, which is going to change the recycling world throughout Oregon. And so yeah, hopefully that'll have less garbage going to the landfill, and that could extend the life. But yeah, I'm hoping to pivot from kind of learning the job to really forward thinking and addressing some of those future problems. So that is a great question and something we will have to discuss with SWAC and then think about moving forward. So thanks for bringing that up. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. It was just interesting. I was talking with my fellow commissioner from Gillum County, and that is that's how they make their money. That's how come that county is far more solvent than most counties, is because they, I believe, have landfills out there. So it's an interesting conversation, but thank you for being willing to field that out of left field. But I'm completely in support of this contract.
As am I. We have a great relationship with Don G. Averill Recycling and Hauling, and I'm fully supportive.
Okay. Madam Chair, in consideration of a contract for general services with Don G. Averill Recycling, Inc. for the hauling of municipal solid waste, MSW, yard debris, and other materials from the Pacific City Transfer Station to the Tillamook Transfer Station, I move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes. Thank you, Justin. You have the next item as well. Item 12, consideration of an order in the matter of the reappointment of a member to the Tillamook County Solid Waste Service District Budget Committee.
Yes, so I recently spoke with Mr. Kevin Stoker. He served on the Solid Waste Division Budget Committee, I believe, for 5 years now, and he's up for being reappointed. He said he'd like to help the transition from my predecessor, Dave McCall, and see a nice solvent future going forward. I also know, I believe he served on the Parks Advisory Board for 5 to 7 years, something like that. So it sounds like he's got some experience with being on boards. Enjoyed a couple conversations I've had with him. And this will complete, again, I'm still learning the ins and outs of the budget process, but I believe this will bring us to 3 individuals, as well as the 3 commissioners for the Solid Waste Budget Committee. So we have Leanne Welsh, currently the mayor of Bay City, has agreed to fulfill the rest of her term, which expires at the end of 2024. We have Mr. Kevin Stoker reappointed for, I believe, a 2-year term. And then Mr. Ken Henson is also on the Solid Waste Budget Committee. I believe his term expires at the end of this year. So this would complete our Solid Waste Budget Committee and give us some good perspective and help us craft the final budget for fiscal year 24-25. Happy to answer any questions if you do have any, commissioners.
Thank you, Justin. Commissioner?
Not much, thank you. As I mentioned earlier, we're in the process, I believe there's still a vacancy or 2, but this group really works well together, and I have gone through their preliminary budget, and it does take up a couple of increases here and there, but it's outside the general fund and it's self-supporting. And I might add for listeners, this is a multi-million-dollar program. It's not just a few dollars here and there. This is a big deal. We move a lot of stuff around Tillamook County and then out of the county. So these are important decisions, but this one before us now, I'll support that.
Thank you.
And I agree. I appreciate Kevin's willingness to serve. It's always great when you have someone who has the experience and knowledge to be able to reappoint them and continue to move forward.
As do I. I'm grateful for the Solid Waste Budget Committee members, the citizen members who give of their time and their expertise in this matter, and I'm happy to reappoint Kevin.
Okay. Madam Chair, in consideration of order number 24-012 and Solid Waste Service District Order number 24-002 in the matter of the reappointment of a member to the Tillamook County Solid Waste Service District Budget Committee, I move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes. All right. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, commissioners.
Item 13 is consideration of an out-of-state travel request for Don Algier to attend the American Library Association Annual Conference in San Diego, California from June 27th to July 2nd, 2024. Good morning, Don.
Good morning, commissioners. I have before you today a request for out-of-state travel to the American Library Association in San Diego for an amount of $2,710.52. This is the annual American Library Association Conference. It's an opportunity to learn from other library systems around the country in terms of what is happening and how services are evolving in libraries. It's also a really important opportunity for us in terms of connecting with vendors, both the current vendors we have, as well as understanding what the marketplace looks like and what other vendors are out there for library services. And then lastly, for me, it's also a professional obligation that as a member of the board of directors for American Library Association Corps, as well as I'm standing for president of CORE right now, and we'll know as of April 12th whether I'm the president-elect going into this next year. So a lot going on this year at the American Library Association meeting, and yeah, I'm glad to answer any questions you might have about it.
Thank you, Don. As the library liaison, I just want to say that I'm grateful for your leadership. I'm grateful for your leadership of our local library, but also your leadership at a national level. And you know, for folks who might not know, every department budget has money in it for training and conferences, and we fully support our employees having the opportunity for continued training and to keep up with best practices in the industry and connect with other systems, et cetera. So I'm fully supportive.
As am I. Thank you. I agree. We definitely want to make sure that we are using best practices, that we stay current, that we look at technologies and efficiencies and all of those pieces. And when the librarian, association comes together, that's a great space where all of that is presented, and we can make sure we're doing the best possible for our residents. And so I'm fully in support of Don going.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I too support that. I'm always been a believer in no point in reinventing the wheel. Others have done something or are doing something that can be useful to our system as well. Only comment I would have, you would think people as smart as librarians could schedule the conference in San Diego, of all places, in January instead of in June and July. But be that as it may, it's a great town and good for you. So yes, I support.
Thank you. I think we're ready for a motion.
Okay. Madam Chair, in consideration of an out-of-state travel request for Don Algeier to attend the American Library Association Annual Conference in San Diego, California from 6/27 to 7/2/2024, I move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes. Thank you, Don.
Thank you, commissioners.
Good morning, Sarah. Item 14 is consideration of a resolution adopting the 2023 Tillamook County Multi-Jurisdictional National Hazards Mitigation Plan. And with us, we have Sarah Absher, Director of Community Development.
Thank you, Chair Bell. Good morning. It is my pleasure to be here this morning to request your signature on a 2-year project that has finally been completed. So the Tillamook County Multi-Jurisdictional Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan, or what all of us that have worked on it refer to it as the HMP, is a document. It's actually a planning document that identifies the natural hazards Tillamook County is prone to. We have to assess the level of risk of each of those hazards. This is something I'm going to try to condense a several 100-page document into about a 5-minute summary. So this document is significant, first and foremost, because we have to maintain this document every 5 years with approval from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and Oregon Emergency Management to maintain our eligibility for disaster funding relief. So we have to do it. And good news is it's done. So we're good for another 5 years. And the FEMA and Oregon Emergency Management have blessed this document and the work that we have done, which is even better. And so basically what this is it's an inventory and assessment of our risk to natural hazards that Tillamook County as a whole faces, whether it's the cities, whether it's the school districts, our water and sewer districts, our unincorporated communities. We are required to do this assessment and identify what those hazards are. So probably no surprise to anyone that the most common natural hazard that we are exposed to is flooding, right? And that's one of our most frequent. So we have to inventory and assess these. Imminent hazards that we know are also a risk, but that are not as frequent would be something like an earthquake or a tsunami, right? And then you have everything in between. Since the report and the plan was last updated, we had a wildfire in 2020. And so we had to talk about that this time during this update cycle, and we had to now assess that risk. As a result of that exposure and other events, we actually also had new partners join us in this plan this year, including Tillamook PUD. So it's not required for special districts to participate. But again, the value of this document is when we are trying to leverage grants or recovery funding from a natural disaster, this plan is the first thing FEMA and Oregon Emergency Management point to say, what's in your plan? Did you do the assessment? We also have to include metrics, and those largely are, what are we doing as communities and districts to reduce or minimize the risk of hazard? So those are things Randy Thorpe is working on with our emergency management division. Chris Lady of Public Works, he's working on that culvert replacement, different things, the Kilchis House, things, improvements that help minimize our level of risk. Community development, we do that through geologic hazard reports and floodplain development permits. Cities, special districts follow the same thing. PUD has several emergency response plans related to any type of disaster. So that is all encompassed in this plan. And now that the plan is done, provided that you are ready to adopt it, this plan will be given to Randy Thorpe, because now it becomes his document for the next 5 years. And he and I, the Sheriff's Office, Public Works, the cities, our districts, and others will work together as events occur over the next 5 years. We know there will be some. And then we will track that, and that reporting will go into our next 5-year cycle. And so with that, I do want to give a few quick thank yous. I'd like to thank first and foremost Catherine Daniels at the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development. She helped spearhead this. There's no way we could have done all this work without her. It was a huge undertaking. And then of course, all of our partners, if you look within, I think it's the second page of the plan, it outlines everyone. And there were several people that were a part of this. I'd like to thank Commissioner Scar for her leadership as the county commissioner liaison on this, and then all of our communities. One of, I think, the coolest things we did during this process, we had to do some public education and outreach, was we actually participated in the South Tillamook County Emergency Volunteer Corps Emergency Preparedness Fair at HEPO 2 years ago. And that was a lot of fun. I enjoy those events. I think we need to do more of them. Those types of outreach and events are baked into our plan for our metrics and our plan of action over the next 5 years. And so we'll see where it goes, but this resolution is our way of hopefully adopting this plan. We can send this off to FEMA. The cities, the districts are in process of doing the same thing, and then we're good for a few years. We'll see what happens. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yes, thank you. And I want to thank Sarah for all of her work on this. This was a monumental lift. We met monthly over, certainly we've been doing off and on for the last 2 years. We've met monthly, spent time going through a series of exercises that Catherine led us through to really identify every single thing you could think of. Another thing that got added into this plan, I believe this year, was a pandemic.
That's right.
We were looking at what have the traditional hazards been, and there were the new hazards. The fire came up, the pandemic came up, but we looked at everything from algal blooms that could occur to smoke that wouldn't necessarily be a fire in our community, but would be a fire elsewhere that would bring smoke to our community. I mean, really looking widely at every hazard that might occur, and then ranking it in the just sort of how frequently do we think it would occur? What is the is how frequently, how far away? I mean, it was just these crazy rankings, but we spent a lot of time really having good conversations. And I think, as with many different plans that get created, the plan itself is important. It's valuable. FEMA requires us to have it. And the conversations that we had were equally, if not more valuable, as we all sat together at a table and said, what if? How would we work together? What are our concerns? Where do we see gaps in this work? So there's just a lot that happens because you have to do this plan. So it's a massively huge plan. I never did download it because it was way too many pages to do that. We always read it online. I think Debbie asked if I wanted it printed for this meeting. It's 400 and some odd pages. So there's a lot of information in there, but it's really critical. When we have a disaster, when we go for funding, they actually open up this plan at the FEMA level and say, did you identify identify this as a potential hazard? And if the answer is no, we didn't identify it, I think we actually are in question whether or not we can get any emergency funding for that event. So they are asking you to have a very, very clear crystal ball, which means we did everything to include everything we could, because we don't have a clear crystal ball. So thank you very much, Sarah, for your hard work on this. All of our partners that you have already thanked, Catherine. It's a crucial document for us, and happy that it's complete. Delighted to adopt it.
Thank you. Commissioner?
Thank you. I looked at it and I must say I didn't read every word because it was 414 pages or something like that. But I did go through it, and what I began to appreciate was that virtually every significant city or agency was listed, and they've been a participant. So that's number one. And number two, there was some kind of a system that we could talk about another time of ranking of the relative hazards. And as was pointed out, nobody can see around the corner. And so something is bound to happen in the next 4 or 5 years. And the most likely being flooding, of course, but probably something else. And so this is a framework. I'm also somewhat familiar with the incident command system that I think you probably have talked about as well. And I took one class in that. I happen to be a certified incident commander, and that and $5 will get me a soda or a cup of coffee, I guess. But it is a good system, and I think you employ that, or that's what's employed during these events. And so it certainly is a step forward. And I guess what I liked is that it wasn't the county saying we're going to do this or you need to do that or some other level of government. It was a bunch of people responsible for their jurisdiction saying, here's what's possible to come our way. How do we deal with it? And what's next? And where do we get help? So I think it's a pretty good start. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I am also grateful for this work, for years of work on this. And as you said, we have to have it in order to receive funding and services from FEMA. But additionally, as the liaison to emergency management, it's essential for preparedness. It's essential that we be forward thinking and plan in advance for the things that are likely to happen here. And there are a lot of things likely to happen here. As most of us know, Tillamook is the most disaster-rich county in the state of Oregon, which is an optimistic way to think about it. So yeah, so this is essential work, and it's essential to the work that'll go on with emergency management and emergency preparedness in the years to come. So thank you very much for this body of work. Thank you.
Okay. Madam Chair, in consideration of Resolution R-24-004 adopting the 2023 Tillamook County Multi-Jurisdictional Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan, I move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. And item 15 is very similar. Should we just move
Yeah.
right through it?
I think that you just took the action to do that. So I think we just rolled those two agenda items together. Is that right? Yeah, so we're good.
Okay.
I think we're good.
Then we'll
Okay.
wait for a motion.
So, Madam Chair, in consideration of the adoption of Tillamook County's Multi-Jurisdictional Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan 2023 update, I move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay. Item 16 is consideration of an order in the matter of the reappointment of a member to the Tillamook County Tourism Advisory Committee. And I believe we have Isabel Gildo with us, perhaps online. Okay. All right, Isabel, if you can hear us, we'll get back to you. Okay, so item 17, and thank you so much for your patience through this meeting this morning. The Oregon Department of Forestry Habitat Conservation Plan presentation. We have with us Mike Wilson, State Forest Division Chief, Kevin Boyd, State Forest Asset Manager, Mike Caffaretta, Forest Grove District Forester, Kate Skinner, Tillamook District Forester. So thank you. Thank you all. Sorry. Oh, Isabel, can we call you back?
Sure.
Thank you. Yes, perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for being here. We've really been looking forward to this conversation, this presentation.
Good morning. I'll kick off this morning. So I was on your agenda to be here anyways, but was bumped for this topic.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm glad we had the time. So as you made the introduction, so my friends are with me here today. So just to give some clarity. So we have Kevin Boyd, who's our asset unit manager, really the business manager for State Forest out of our Salem office. And then Mike Caffaretta, my peer on the other side of the hill here. And of course, Mike Wilson's going to kick us off here. We're going to do a little bit of a round robin conversation today and presentation for you. And just spend as much time, it sounds like, as you guys want to spend on trying to answer some questions and provide clarity for you this morning.
Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you, Kate, for the introduction. It's really a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for inviting us up to talk about this. We're going to have a lot to talk about over the next few years. And I really want to, first of all, thank Commissioner Scar for wanting to engage us going forward. I think there's a very productive relationship to be had here. I also want to take a moment to just really compliment everything I heard from your county staff this morning. All of these issues were presented to you very well reasoned decisions, recommendations, and just a real compliment to them for their work there.
Thank you.
So with that, I guess we can start the presentation. And so we are here today to talk about we have the HCP, and we also have the forest management plan that we're going to be working on that is a companion piece to that. As you know, I think pretty well already, our current forest management plan is not really designed to play with an HCP very well. And we have been pursuing for a long time a strategy called take avoidance, which is just a survey and manage approach where we try to find species and protect them. So we'll start with a little bit of an overview of the HCP and the conservation areas. We'll talk a little bit about the Swiss needlecast and the hardwood dominated stands and the challenges that they present. Then we'll get a little bit more into volume and values that'll be coming up from timber revenues specifically, and also the projections of those volumes and values. And we want to talk a little bit about long-term projections and short-term projections, and a little bit of variability that we see that goes into that, which can be, of course, it's actually sort of a shared issue that we have in terms of like, when does the money come in? So we'll talk about that as well. So I'll start us off here with the next slide, talking a little bit about the HCP. I think by now most people have heard about it in general. We have designed habitat conservation areas within Tillamook County. We have about 127,000 acres of habitat conservation areas. They're based on where species are already known to occur, or whether there are suitable and highly suitable habitat that already occurs or will occur. And also based a bit on habitat connectivity on the landscape. And by habitat connectivity, we're not just talking about the ability for species to disperse across the landscape. We are talking about creating better patches of habitat. One of the key issues that most of the species that are covered by the Habitat Conservation Plan currently deal with is just having habitat that's not in a good patch size for them as well. This is not unlike some of the objectives that we have in our current forest management plan, where we've really focused on what's called complex structure to provide for those same species. The difference being we don't get an incidental take permit for that. But for our riparian conservation areas, we do have no harvest stream buffers. The width, of course, varies by the type of stream, whether it's a fish stream or not, the size of the stream, flow duration. And then the real goals there, the primary goals, are both for the cool, clean water, those quality aquatic habitat there, and with wood recruitment to, of course, further that more. For some of our streams, our seasonal streams that are not either debris flow hazards or high energy streams, we have equipment restriction zones. So there's not a tree buffer, but there are restrictions on how we use equipment to preserve the channel integrity and so forth. And so I'll just, again, to the table there, we have about between 126 and 127,000 acres of upland habitat conservation areas, and also about 23,000 acres of 24,000 acres of riparian conservation areas in Tillamook County. So that's a total of about 150,000. Okay, to the next slide. And this is just a map of how those areas lay out. The pink is basically just the general landscape. The green areas that are shaded are either the riparian conservation areas, which you can kind of make out there with the squiggly lines where streams would be. And then the larger blocks are habitat conservation areas for the upland species that are protected under the HCP.
And I think this map is important. I don't know. We assume that people are watching with us out in the public today. And if they're not, they'll pick up this recording and have the chance to look at it. As we went through this process, we talked a lot about with the models and different things that came out of ODF. Really, we talked about it at a Forest Trust land county level, and we talked about it across the entire landscape. So this is an opportunity, I think, for Tillamook County to begin to kind of dig in and look a little bit more closely. And we've talked about our special districts and the concerns that some of them have around the harvest and how that will impact them. And so I think this, while it doesn't have special district boundaries on it specifically, lets people kind of get a gander at where are those habitat conservation areas, and those who are in special districts. You can take a look at this map and you can overlay where you know your boundaries to be to get a sense of the impact to your particular special district. So I think for me, that was one of the reasons I asked for this map, was just that I don't know that our community has kind of looked at this in detail or in depth. So thank you for bringing it.
Certainly. And one thing that we are continuing to do, just saying, is work more with, and this is really through Brandon Persinger at Association of Oregon Counties, to look a little bit more at special districts as well. He recently had a request, and we are working on that.
Perfect. Thank you. Because I think, you know, the one of the reasons we invited you is we're getting into budget season. So we're trying to, you know, intuit the impacts here. And I know that they're doing the same. So we appreciate just the detailed information you're providing.
Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. And so when we look at those acres, what we like to do is what's called an available acres analysis. And you can feel free to kick me anytime you want here, Kate. And so this is just sort of at a high level how things break down. And what this shows are the net acres available. So from the top to the bottom, there are things that are stuff that we really can't do much about, right? So we have roads, those don't grow trees. Non-forested areas and administratively removed sites. And then a large portion of Tillamook County, you know, we just heard about the disasters, you know, it's rugged ground, and for sure. So we have a lot of areas that are just not loggable as well. And then from there, we move into our current legal non-HCP related items. That goes from everything from Forest Practices Act wildlife requirements through landslide public safety features, the RCAs, which they are as the specific widths and so forth are part of the HCP. However, there is going to be a need for some type of riparian protection that, even though the widths could be, some may argue, could be a little bit different, they're not going to be a lot different. Also, we have a lot of inoperable inner gorge areas. Those are smaller features on the landscape, but they show up in our operations. Then we have our murrelet and northern spotted owl areas that we currently have and have to protect. And then a little bit of old growth. We have in our administrative rule and our forest management plan, we have very little old growth, and what true old growth we have, we don't cut. But then we get more into the actual HCP acres. So once you've discounted all of those other things, there's about 35,000 additional acres in HCAs, leaving the actual available acres completely unconstrained by any HCP factor at about 114,000 acres or so. And I think at this point, I would like to segue to Kate and see if she has anything to add to that.
So I think one of the biggest pieces this slide and the next slide is to really hone in on the Tillamook State Forest, Tillamook County. We talked about previously around the physical pieces of limitations that we have. And so Mike talked a little about the inoperable areas. And this morning, as I was thinking about this, is like we've kind of named them. Right? It's the Sawtooths, it's King Mountain, it's Tilden Bluffs, so it's those kind of things that we're looking at. And also, as we get further into this presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about within those HCAs that are shown there, the 35,000 acres. We'll be talking more about the management that we will be doing in some of those areas as well moving forward. So if we can go to the next slide. So this is part of the question that you asked, Commissioner Scar, around trying to get down to a little more detail. We don't have it to the special district detail that you've been looking for, but we've been looking at the school districts. And so this is the same limitations we have on the physical, the contractual legal requirements and the HCP between the 3 school districts for our county. And again, not a big difference just because we already have so many contractual and physical limitations on those, but it starts to paint that picture that you were asking for around the different districts, and more detail to come on that as we get into the smaller taxing districts as well.
Yeah, thank you. I know that's important to our school district. I know that both Neocani and Nestucca tend to be above the bubble, as we call it, meaning they don't get school equalization funds currently, and in fact have more funds to operate with than they would if they got school equalization. So it's, I think, of significant concern to both of those school districts. Will they fall to a level that places them on equalization, and will they fall to a level where they are operating at that minimum that all school districts do instead of where they've been in the past. So thank you for that. I hope hopefully they're watching with us and have that look at that.
Yeah. So for example of the Tillamook School District in the last column there of additional requirements that would come from this HCP is only another 7,800 acres of above and beyond what we are doing currently. Arrangement.
Yeah, and they're the one that is they're on school equalization. They don't get enough to put them above the bubble. I think Neocani is the one that is most significantly above the bubble. And it looks like there's an additional 22,000 acres out of their pool that will now be in an HCA and have limited harvest. So I think that will be of interest to them. And I know they've been looking at their budget and preparing, I think, for the eventuality of an HCP. But I think this, again, just helps us all on the ground start to wrap our heads around true impact. So thank you for that.
One of the things that isn't shown here, and I don't expect, Kate, that you'd have this number on top of your head because I don't either. But this is showing the way forward as we have the HCP now moving towards completion. It doesn't show our current desired future condition complex structure. That is information that, of course, we've talked about before and discussed through FTLAC, and there's a delta there. There's a little bit of a difference between our desired future condition management as we do that under our current FMP, and then also our HCP and the management that we can do inside of HCAs, which we'll talk about in a minute. As well, there's a difference there, but there's a bit of a, maybe I shouldn't characterize it this way, but I will. There's a bit of a wash in that there is still active management going on there. It's just the nature of it is different.
Next slide. So one of the Commissioner Scar wanted us to talk a little bit about Swiss Needlecast here. So this is a map of Tillamook District. Of course, Swiss Needlecast doesn't stop at the county line to the north for Clatsop or at the district line to the east for Forest Grove, but in pulling from other presentations, this is the one we have. So I wanted to give a little context though of Swiss Needlecast and trying to put the context around how much of it's on the landscape. So what is done each year is there's an aerial flight that basically flies over all the forests of Oregon, and they draw on a map of what discoloration they can see from those flights. And so this is how we begin the starting point of how much Swiss Needlecast is on our forest. And so in my time, it's been as low as 10,000 acres given to us on a map and as high as 100,000 acres. And so what we try to do is we try to look at kind of a 3-year average of those numbers to decide how much is on the landscape. And then there's a further ground truthing of all that. And there further, we might show the yellow of the Swiss needle cast on this map shows it's present. But when we get on the ground, we do further evaluation to decide if it's low, moderate, or severe. So approximately 17% of the habitat conservation areas would be ranked as severe Swiss needle cast impacts. And so I would say in my career, this has been kind of the driving force of our harvest, and really trying to address the most severe stands first. So moving forward under the Habitat Conservation Plan, as I said earlier, there would be management inside the habitat conservation areas of 500 to 1,000 acres per year for Swiss needle cast, and that would be in the first 30 years of the HCP permit time. And then outside of the HCA's harvest for Swiss needle cast and other issues are only restrained by cost and operability. So we'd be addressing it throughout our harvest. Okay, next slide. And then similar, we also have a lot of hardwood dominated stands in Tillamook County. So we've talked a little bit in the past about the history of the Tillamook burn, and they started reforestation from the east and moved to the west. So by the time they got here, we had a lot of hardwood dominated stands that had already taken place on the landscape, as well as what you can see on that map a little bit is a lot of linear features, which are our streams, and a lot of streams dominated by hardwoods as well. So those hardwoods start to decline in growth around age 60. They'll persist on the landscape, but just not put on the same volume that they would earlier. So approximately 18% of our conservation areas are hardwood dominated stands. And like Swiss needle cast, we would be managing those conservation areas for 500 to 1,000 acres per year for the first 30 years of the permit period. And again, anything outside of those HCAs, we would be as well targeting hardwood stands and managing to replace those with healthy stands. So between the last slide and this one, the total Swiss needle cast and hardwoods, we'd be doing 1,000 acres per year. And that would primarily be in Tillamook County to address those stands.
And when you and I spoke, Kate, one of the things we talked about was just different value for hardwoods and Swiss needle cast versus, healthy timber. And that when we talk about Tillamook County going forward, as we tried to tease out of the model, yes, we're still looking at 47 million board feet, which I don't know how that relates to acres, but we've used that number, and that revenue wise, there is a potential for revenue to drop based on the fact that two things. One, we have more hardwoods and Swiss needle cast, and two, we're going to be going to harder to harvest areas that are going to be more costly to harvest. So can you just kind of talk about that and make sure I didn't misstate anything?
Yeah, so as far as wood quality, there's no difference between a needle cast or a healthy conifer. And so what it is, though, is we have less growth per acre, so we're not putting on the volume. And so that's where we see some of the reductions. And yeah, as you've seen, and we've talked about the inoperable areas and the steep lands of Tillamook, logging costs are higher here, so it's always more difficult. The forest growth side makes up for those costs, and a much better market and marketable log on that side as well.
Thank you.
And so as I'm listening to you, Kate, and in a previous presentation, we talked about this, you talked about this. I'm thinking and a more optimistic way to look at it is that I feel lucky. I feel lucky that in Tillamook County, we have a bunch of Swiss needle cast and alder that we will be able to continue to harvest for 30 years, which is not true in other districts. Would you say that's true?
Lucky, subjective. That is a glass half full kind of view. Well, we have, when we decide on harvest plans, there's a lot of different drivers around that. And so, for us in my career here, it's been about needle cast and hardwood management. And there are different drivers of age classes and those kind of things in other districts. And I don't know if you want to chime in, Mike, a little bit about what's the drivers for you as well.
And it might be useful to explain to viewers why Mike is here, since he is not in the Tillamook district. And I didn't know until I got into the Forest Trust lands counties work more deeply that we actually had lands that were managed by anything outside of the Tillamook district. So.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioners. Mike Cafferetta, the Forest Grove District Forester. And so we organize ourselves various ways around the state for all sorts of different things. The Department of Forestry is organized into districts, which are basically geographic. Where can you most efficiently drive to all of rural Oregon for fire protection and land management? And in that set of decisions, the Forest Grove District manages land in Tillamook County. And so we have about 46,000 acres in Washington County of the Tillamook State Forest. We still call it the Tillamook State Forest, even though it's in Washington County. Always confuses people. We have about 6,500 acres in Columbia County, and then the balance of our 115,000 is in Tillamook County, about 60,000 acres. And like Kate said, just based on geography and luck of the draw and how they reforested the Tillamook after the burns, we got the lion's share of the good timber and the ground that is not so steep. So we don't take any credit for that. We're just fortunate to work in Forest Grove.
Thank you, Mike.
So back to your question, Commissioner Bell, is around, looking at sustainable harvest and age classes and managing it over time. So it's very different for every district of what the history is of those lands and what the drivers are for decision making. As we've talked before, we own a large portion of Tillamook County. And then if there's scatter blocks, like we have scatter blocks around Beaver and Hebo and those kind of things. And those are different management decisions down there of rotation ages, accessibility and all those things. So, so there's a lot of different drivers in that decision making, but yes, we will be managing and harvesting into the future.
Thank you.
All right, so I think I'm done with my time and I'm gonna turn it over to Kevin on the next slide to start talking about values and volumes.
So this slide shows our current volume and values on our timber sale contracts that's under contract. So currently statewide volume is 306 million board feet. And out of that, 101 million board feet is in Tillamook County, with 60 million board feet in Tillamook District and 41 million board feet in Forest Grove, with the value of 43.28 million. So the bottom table shows when those timber sale contracts expire with the volume and value. So this year in 2024, 7.2 million board feet and $2.89 million will expire. So the bulk of the timber sales will expire in 2025 and 2026. And I will say that most of our timber sales are for a 3-year term, and where their purchaser decides when to harvest, and they're set up on a recovery basis where it's pay as you cut. And so we receive revenue as they harvest because we bill for what they cut. And in 2018, we implemented a midterm payment where the purchaser is required to pay 40 to 50% of the appraised value if they haven't cut 40 to 50% of the volume halfway through the contract. So to try to keep those contracts on schedule and to help with the revenue flow, both for the state and the county. So next slide, please. So this is the harvest activity. So on Board of Forestry lands in the last 5 years, our annual harvest was 239.6 million board feet. And it significantly dropped in FY22 to 198.4 million board feet. Then again in FY23 to 203.9 million board feet. And the difference between the 5-year average and FY23 was a negative 14.9%. I will say that that's the lowest harvest level that we've seen since 2001, when we harvested 195 million board feet. For Tillamook County, the 5-year annual harvest average is 75.7 million board feet. So in FY22, it was 46.8 million board feet. FY23, 65.6 million board feet. So the difference between the 5-year average and FY23 was a negative 13.3%. So, which is a little bit better than our statewide average.
And when you say Tillamook County, you're talking about both districts, right, that occur in Tillamook County? Thank you.
And to what do you attribute the drop? Or can you?
So there's several possible reasons. So there was lots of fire salvage sales going on, both industrial and private landowners and state. So that would have increased harvest levels from the private industrial, which would be less need for state harvested wood. Good prices, so more private wood moving during that time period. Then we have the new FPA rules that are going to affect. So again, private industrial landowners might be harvesting more on those areas that'll be inoperable in the future. And locally in Tillamook County, we had a decrease of logging capacity during those years. So those would be a few items that I would say, you know, there's just not one item you can pick to, but there's several different items there.
Thank you. Hey, could we go back to the previous slide, please, Deb? So it looks like the value under contract is strong in 25 and 26 and then drops precipitously in 27. So can you talk about that for a minute?
Yes, because again, our timber sale contract terms are for a 3-year term. And so once you get towards the end of that 3 years, we have less volume under contract, but we're still continuing to sell timber sales. And we constantly have maintained over 300 million board feet statewide under contract. So I don't see that dropping off significantly unless there's a real, if markets increase significantly, they're going to start harvesting more of that volume under contract than they have, but consistently we've carried about that much volume under contract.
Okay, thank you.
The bottom table is harvest volume, basically kind of year to date for fiscal year. So in July 1st, 2023 through March 1st, we're at 43 million. And if you compare that to the previous fiscal year, we're at 44.9 million. So we're currently kind of year to date, fiscal year to date, behind last year of a negative 4.41% in volume and about a negative 13% in value.
And that's so far, we have 1 quarter left to go, correct?
That's correct.
And the value would be lower compared to the volume. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yes, I can. So there's lots of factors. And so it depends on when the sales were sold and what the market conditions were at the time. And so what the bid was on those timber sales and prices per species.
Okay. Okay. So it's the market as opposed to the actual value of the timber.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
And I'll just chime in for a second. I don't know, Mike, if you've got some inputs, but what we're seeing too is now that private landowners have the new forest practices rules, what we're seeing are they finished up some of their work there that they were doing before January 1st and coming to state forest land. And so I know we've started up multiple contracts and expecting more to start in the next couple months. And so, like you said, that last quarter, I'm actually expecting a little bit of an uptick in our districts just from what we're seeing of sales that have been starting to move wood now.
Great.
Yeah, that's why I'd say statewide is so we were actually tracking ahead of last year's numbers up until January. Then, of course, we had a little weather. And so at a time when normally purchasers move or operators move off of private lands onto us because we tend to have a higher proportion of rock roads and they can do more work in the winter. And then they got hit with that. February looked pretty decent, actually. So I think I agree. I think statewide, we're going to come up in our numbers in the final quarters. Not quite sure how much. However, I will say that we do not anticipate that we are going to meet the projection from the CFTLC annual report. That projection was from last August. And there was a certain amount of revenue associated with that. And we show the revenue number. We don't necessarily show the volume number behind it currently in the format of the report. But we were anticipating for that we would bring in 255 million feet. Is that correct, Kevin? For FY24? Probably not. But it should still be, we are still anticipating it will be more than 23 or 22. And at some point, the volume is still there on the contracts, as we can see, and we do have new planned volume that comes on. So it is largely a timing issue.
And that's still FTLAC 250 million. So we're still looking at 47 million roughly in Tillamook County, I think was the projection. And then I think, what did you tell me, Mike? If I have your projection, I don't have your, so the total projection for I only have 23. That doesn't help. I do know the dollar amount we started with in our projection for this year was 8 million, and then we got a revised projection for 6 million. So I assume that and last year what we actually recognized was 4.5 million roughly. So I assume we're tracking somewhere between that 4.5 and 6 when you say you're expecting that to bump up, because we're currently at 3 something. I'm looking at Sean because I know she's tracking those numbers in the back as well.
I have some revenue numbers on the next slide
Oh,
that might help
awesome.
with the conversation.
Yeah.
So the top table, the flow of volume, what that illustrates is that's our FY24 projection that was in the CFTLC annual report. And for Tillamook County, all sale volumes for FY24 harvested was projected at 76.68 million board feet. Out of that, the breakdown of those is what's sold is 66.81 million, and planned, which is our annual operation plans that's been approved, is 9.87 million board feet for that total. So really in the first year of our projection, 87% of our sales are sold under contract, and 13% is what's planned. And so we have more confidence the first year of our projection, because as you get to FY 25, 26, and 27, we have less sold sales under contract, more planned. And then our future volume, it comes from our implementation plan volume numbers. And that's how we get that for the projections. So the bottom table is our last quarter quarterly revenue projection that we share with the counties for October to December. So our projection was 5.79 million. Our county payments was actually 3.45 million. And so the difference was a negative 2.3 million. So there is variability in our quarterly cash analysis. We admit that. Going back to the quarter prior, FY24 Q1, we projected 4.5 million and we distributed 4.8 million. Currently, this quarter, the third quarter FY24, we projected 3.8 million and we should exceed 5 million.
Great.
This distribution. So with Mike saying we had a slow up in January, February was a terrific month. And right now we're averaging statewide about 1 million board feet cut daily.
And in Tillamook County specifically?
Your daily cut, I don't know.
So just to be clear, it worries me when you say we expect 5 million because statewide we're tracking at 1 million. So I think that's, that 5 million is specifically based on Tillamook cut.
Yeah, we should exceed that. And so with this projection that showed on the table, we were projecting for that quarter 5.8 million. This quarter we projected 3.8 and we should exceed 5 million in distribution.
Okay. Good news.
Last slide.
So, yeah, we can go back here to last December's board meeting, and this is more the long-term number, right? So we had, as we have continued to work from the HCP to a new draft FMP, and we're presenting some scenarios to the board on what the volumes might look like. We modeled several scenarios, and I don't know if you've had a chance to review the board packet there, but there were 4 different scenarios. They were modeled at 2 different geographic scales, except for one of them was not. So we actually had 7 scenarios. Scenario 1, which is a non-declining even flow of volume over the long term, planned out at the district scale. And so this would be Tillamook and Forest Grove having 2 separate implementation plans, harvest objectives, and that, although the numbers here are combined from those districts for the county. It's just typical of the way we do our planning. And so it's the number that we're showing you here today. Is we would expect that there'd be 69.7 million board feet coming from Tillamook County over the long term under the HCP with a value of about 18.2 million. So some things around those numbers. We did a lot of work. I think a lot of people realize the volume numbers were less than we had projected a few years ago. And there's the reasons around that really mostly circulate around growth and yield and our ability to project that. There's a lot of factors that go into that. And it's something that, quite frankly, all forest managers struggle with. Fortunately, we've made some strides forward in inventory that are going to allow us to really have a better picture of that going forward. Tillamook is still a little bit of a problem area, and it is because of, excuse me, it is primarily, it's three things. There's the Swiss needlecast, there are the alder stands, and then there's just the fact that it's off-site seed. So after the Tillamook burn, we have, I think it's a very important story in Oregon. A lot of people participated in reforestation of the burn, but the fact is almost all of it was reseeded aerially by helicopter, right? That seed came from various places because there wasn't enough seed available. It came as far away as Montana. It's my understanding. We don't even have good records as to where it all came from. And not bashing anybody who came before me, they had this massive problem they were trying to deal with. They did a great job. But one of the characteristics of off-site seed is it grows well at first, and then it doesn't. So even in the absence of various forest health issues that we have with Swiss needlecast, we do have just slower growing stands in Tillamook. Now, we did accommodate to the degree we could. So there is a little bit of uncertainty in that volume number long term. However, there's also ways that we can work together moving forward to figure out that actual volume flow over time. So I mentioned the non-declining even flow. In my opinion, we have a lot of good reasons to depart from that, especially in Tillamook County. And one of them is we have a lot of forest health issues to deal with. We have a lot of poorly growing stands to deal with. And how do you deal with that? Well, you harvest it and you start over with something else. So there's certain sideboards, obviously, that we'll be operating with the HCP. But I think there's a good chance, I think there's every opportunity for us to be able to hit good volume targets. The uncertainty on the value side, of course, is just the free market.
On the value side, right.
Right now, things are actually really good, but it's because log supply is tight for a whole host of reasons across the state. And, that will change eventually. So it's great right now, but in the future, it will change over time, and we'll certainly see a recession in the future and a drop in log prices and all that kind of stuff. So it's something that we all just need to be aware of around just the whole thing.
So I'm going to share with my fellow commissioners something I think I shared via email, but would you pass that down to Doug and one for you? And this is something Kate shared with me via email that I think it gives us a picture, and I don't mean to keep you all out of it, Kate. I know you know what you shared with me, which was the planned volume and the harvested volume, which has really kind of spoken to, I think, our county government cycle of boom and bust, because the planned harvest, if you look at this, and this says fiscal years 2015 through fiscal year 22, and it shows planned harvest, and then it shows actual harvest and revenue to county. And it shows that our planned harvest consistently has held somewhere between, 60 was the lowest and 74 was the highest million board feet. And it shows that our actual harvest has been anywhere from 46 million board feet to 100 million board feet. So so for the county, what that's meant for us is in the good years, we've been able to put that money aside and then use it in the bad years. And I think the challenge that we're having as we try to go forward and look at our budgeting, looking at the model, looking at your 69.7 million board feet and 18.2 million revenue is, are we still expecting a boom and bust, or are we now expecting to stay at a lower level? And Mike, when you and I spoke, you indicated that you felt in your district there was going to be a significant decrease in the amount of board feet harvested when we look at just what the plan will be going forward. Is that something that still stands from the conversation we had, that you thought it would drop by maybe 10 million board feet a year out of your district?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Scar. and there's two things going on here, and we confuse them sometimes, but one is just cash flow or
Sure.
that number you referred to, 46 to 100 million board feet. Like in my district right now, we have 9 sales in Tillamook County with 6 different purchasers. So that's 6 companies trying to decide when to harvest or not harvest their timber. You're going to see those boom and bust cycles go on. One year, they all decide to harvest their state timber, and next year they don't. You get a boom and bust. So that's the cash flow side.
Sure.
The long term is that 70 million board feet. And under the previous plan, that was a little higher. And some of that drop is in Forest Grove District that, the modeling that we talked about shows how much can we out of the Forest Grove District produce long term. Some of that is off the Washington County side, some is off the Tillamook County side. Our Tillamook County side, for various reasons, is more constrained. So there's a drop in that amount from what it's been historically. So when you look at that 70 million board feet, I think Tillamook District is relatively consistent. The drop is on the Forest Grove side as we're coming down a little bit on the Tillamook County portion.
Okay. And so the booms would be a little bit lower because we would be harvesting. And I realize that's all based on log price. So we can't say.
Right. Plus that's going on, right?
Plus or minus the market, but just the board feet available will be a reduced amount of board feet going forward. While Tillamook County, it sounds like will be more consistent because we'll be of the various things on the landscape. The Forest Grove District will see a reduction.
Right. I think we'll sell a consistent amount every year. That consistent amount will be lower than it was in the past.
And do you have an estimate on what that lower amount might be coming out of your district, even for the next 5 years or 10 years, whatever the end of the future you can see?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably still consistent around 50 million board feet or something.
Yeah, our volume is actually going up to about 52 forward.
And yeah, so the balance of that 70 million board feet will be coming off the Forest Grove District. So the models indicate that we'll be getting about 20 million board feet or 18 million board feet from Forest Grove District. Yeah.
If I can add a little bit, so over the last 5 years, between our 2 districts within Tillamook County, it's been as high as 74 million board feet planned sales, and as low as 69. So moving forward, it's on average, I would say, a pretty consistent number. And you and I have talked a lot about the flow of timber, and Kevin's talked about some of the tools we put in place, like the midpoint payment, to try to even out some of those things.
Right.
So it's a challenge for
Yeah.
sure.
I think we're trying to wrap our heads around, will we see a reduction overall? And I'm getting a nod from Mike that there will be a reduction overall, that while when it comes, that's still going to be a cyclic thing, but overall, so when we've had those higher years, maybe we would expect to see those higher years be a little lower, because as you go forward selling sales over the 3-year window, your sales are going to be smaller. And your sales, or your projected amount in your county has been anywhere from 26.4 million board feet out of the Forest Grove District to as low as 12. And you're saying maybe an average around 18 to 20 now.
Yeah, I think those are the best numbers we have to work
Yeah.
with that we've given the Board of Forestry and for the Tillamook County.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we may have said this early on, but please remind me what percentage of Tillamook County forest is in the Forest Grove District? Did we say that in an earlier
We
slide?
said 60,000 acres, but I don't think we said it as a percentage. Our harvestable acres are 100, what did it say? 114,418. And 60,000 of those, I think we said, were in Forest Grove. Is that
Yeah, but I
right?
didn't do the available acres in Forest Grove. That was the total acres.
Oh,
So then we'd have to
okay.
take out RCAs and HCAs and the inoperable, and I didn't bring that number with me.
Okay.
It's about 310, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. The total is around 310.
Right.
310 total, and 60 of those are in the.
60 in Forest
District.
Grove.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, good. I've got a series. I haven't asked any questions yet, but I'm about to, and so.
Right.
Go Doug.
I'll just take a couple of minutes here. First, do you have any reaction or comment on the lawsuit that was filed yesterday to overturn the forest management plan? Or the habitat conservation plan, rather?
No.
And I wouldn't expect you to.
Nice try though, Doug.
Obviously that will have some effect, and who knows where it'll go. And It's just one of those things, and, you know, lawyers like to file lawsuits, that's what they do. Anyway, so the second question I would ask, what's happening here, and I think we all understand it reasonably well, and we've been out on the road talking about it with constituents and others, and could you comment on the effect this might have on both federal land and privately owned land, like Stimson and those, as well as the feds, like the Sius Law and others? In other words, is there a shift of demand, or how do you see that playing out across the larger forest product market?
That's a big question, Commissioner. Thank you. But it's something I like to sit around and think about quite a lot, actually. And not just from the standpoint of the effect of, you know, what our HCP might do and what our forest management plan might do, but just sort of, you know, the Board of Forestry at a higher level is, you know, really, they're revisiting their strategic plan right now. Previously, that's been called the Forestry Program for Oregon, and now it's being called the Vision for Oregon's Forests. But it is their overarching policy document, and they actually address all forests in Oregon with it. It's very high level. But one of the things that has come through that process, and it's been in the works for a while, is this notion of all lands, all hands, right? In terms of, like, we have a lot of forest problems in Oregon that we need to address. One of those is management on federal lands and the big swing that we have experienced over the last 3+ decades there. One of the ways that we do that in state forests, we are partnered with our Forest Resources Division on Good Neighbor Authority timber sales and doing what we can to help increase management on federal forest lands for a variety of reasons. Everything these days is pretty much couched in terms of resilience, but a lot of the work done for resiliency has positive economic outcomes. It's a lot harder to talk about, and we're looking to expand that program as well as part of it's part of the 20-year comprehensive strategy for Oregon for resiliency, forest resiliency. One of the things, though, it's really hard to figure private lands into it. They function for their own economic purposes, their own drivers. Ever since the feds have decreased their harvest, harvest has increased substantially on private lands, and that's where most logs come from, of course, today. Our harvest has increased somewhat over the years as well. Not necessarily tied to anybody else's decisions, but tied to our own policymaking. So it's really hard to see where that will come from. It also depends on who has logs to provide. Really, I mean, you know, some landowners may have harvested more heavily, some landowners may have not, and so, you know, what's their available supply to feed the mills. So it's a tough question. I don't have a good answer for you. I think the main thing that I can offer is that, you know, ODF is trying to lean forward, especially on the federal side, especially using our Good Neighbor Authority to try and really help build that relationship, so that we can produce all kinds of great outcomes, including log supply.
Good, thank you. That helps. Two more quick ones. The HCP is written to extend over 70 years. I have never, in my years of being around this kind of stuff, not necessarily forest, but I've never seen public policy that is 70 years long. It may end up being that long, being renewed and so on, but does that strike you as unusual, or was that by design, or how did that number come to be?
So when we approach these things from a forest management perspective, the thing is time, right? I mean, that's the interesting thing as a forester. You go out there and you do something that you are not going to be alive to see the results of necessarily, right? Maybe you are. Just talk. But you know, I mean, we're talking, especially when we talk about state forests, our average rotation, we typically targeted, you know, when stands culminating growth. You know, it's a common thing to do with a thinning. So we're talking about 70 to 90 years has been our rotation age historically. So in order to really see the benefits a lot of the operations that we're going to do within the HCA's, especially in terms of replacing some of those gas stands with something that grows better, alder as well, and then some of the healthy conifer treatments as well. We need a long enough permit period for those to actually come to fruition, for them to be meaningful mitigation. And then really from a landowner perspective, if we can get into the HCP and get incidental take permits, we've got security for that long haul. Things do change over time. You're absolutely right. And what we will probably see in an HCP of that length are amendments to it. The nice thing is, as long as we have the HCP, we have our incidental take permits. The amendments go through a process. Propose an amendment, you do the work. It's a very similar process to getting an HCP in the first place. There's a federal National Environmental Policy Act process, biological opinions, all the stuff that goes with it. But during that time, you're still following the rules of your HCP and you're still covered. Versus, every time having to go back to the drawing board. So it's actually, and the one thing that's a little hard to describe, but so the services, the federal services, NOAA Fisheries and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they don't like being cops. They really don't. What they would really like to have is some basis for a partnership. And so once there's an HCP in place, there's an incentive for everybody to stay there and work out the issues versus walking away from it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. One final, well, maybe I never say final because I'll probably think of something else, but what's going to happen here, assuming that it goes forward as has been approved, your own funding is going to be cut by some fairly significant number, as I understand it. Where are you going to get that money to backfill, or what are you going to do?
So we will be exploring alternative funding sources. The degree of actual funding gap that we have will really depend on log prices as well as actual volumes that we put out. Something that I've been stressing to the Board of Forestry and just about anybody else these days who will listen is if the idea is that we can fund ourselves on the 36.25% of the revenues we keep, we can't, even currently. Not in a full budget that delivers all of the things that people expect from state forests. We did go through a period post-recession, a long period. Remember those 3-year contract windows? Well, we sold a lot of timber during the recession. It didn't get harvested until after the recession, and it wasn't worth much. And so it caused quite a lag for us. We laid off 30% of our staff with the recession before any other state agency did, because we're responsive to those revenues and not general fund. I shouldn't say agency, say program, because we're only one part of ODF. But it took us, we never really filled back up on those FTE that we reduced. So we are still in a lot of ways still doing more with less. So it was really cost cutting that allowed us to continue to function, as well as, fortunately, we hit that really good market in the middle of the teens. And that helped us to build the FDF back up. Mm-hmm. But even for the last, Kevin is better with the actual numbers, but for a couple of years now, we've been running a deficit again, as we've made those strategic investments that we put off that entire time.
Well, it just seems to me that if let's say revenues go down a relatively modest amount, 15 or 20%, and I know people have said it's going to be more than that, but let's just say that, that would affect your 36% roughly in some fashion. And does that turn into people or programs or both, or do we know?
I think it turns into both. It really is an exploration of all the things that we currently fund with those monies and how we can perhaps fund some of them differently. There's some things that well, I shouldn't get too far out ahead of myself and some of the things that could be worked on. But I mean, there's a very real thing here where we pay our entire forest protection bill for fire out of that as well. That's $3.5 million a year. We don't get a general fund match or anything like that. And so, you know, if one of the things that I'll definitely try to explore in the future is how can we make that more equitable? I mean, other public landowners have to do it as well, but other public land agencies in Oregon also have other funding sources. They're not just revenues that they bring in from their own activities. But that's just one example. But one of the things that we will be doing soon is internally standing up a work group. And it's something we've done in the past as well, to examine, can we make some business improvements? Where can we see efficiencies? And I'd like to put this out there as well. I don't care how flush we are necessarily. We should always be doing that. That's my philosophy. It's a continuous improvement thing. There's no reason for us not to be efficient, even if we were just, you know, flowing flush with cash. And so we want to make sure that we continue that process of always looking at our business and seeing where we can be more efficient.
Okay, well, thank you. Those are good answers. And just remember, you know, flexibility is a key to survival, something like that. And, you know, I guess we're all looking at that right now.
Can I ask if Sean has any particular questions as our treasurer, since I know that she's the one that has to come in front of the budget committee and say, here's the number that I am suggesting and projecting that you all have to use for the budget this year. So I don't know, Sean, if you have any particular questions. Is that all right, Chair?
Oh, sure.
Question is, where do you come up with projections that we have to build our budgets on? This is the projection that I receive and that I have to send out to the taxing districts and they have to build their budgets on. I'm kind of wondering where those can put fiscal year. Debbie, can I share my screen? Yeah, I've got you. That's fiscal year 20. If there's been like this huge disconnect of what the projection has been and what we've actually received. I guess I'm just kind of wondering how you're coming up with blue line is the projection and the red orangish line is what we've actually received. I guess I'm wondering where does that come from? Because I've had taxing districts that when I send a letter out to them, this is what you're projecting to receive, they've actually budgeted that full amount and then we'll get way less. I need something to tell them so that they're not off the rails in their budget.
So I'll try to answer that question. So our revenue projections, they're our annual revenue projections that's published in the CFTLC annual report. We get those by knowing how many timber sales we have under contract by which district, right? And so they're sold, we know what the price is, we know the term, right? We know when they expire. So we know when to, then we model out the flow of those timber sales by district. Out of those 36 months, what percent comes in on which month? And we have a model that projects that. Then it takes in the planned sales, and the planned sales are the sales that are approved in the annual operations plan that's approved, and the districts estimate which quarter those are going to be sold. So then again, we'll model that for a 36-month period. Then in the second year is when our future sales come in, because I've already said, right, 87% of the first year's, right, is our sold sales. So we're more certainty the first year than as you get out years more into planned sales and future sales, there's less certainty. So that first year, in FY24, we were projecting 255 million board feet to be harvested. Not only for that state, we base our budget off of those same numbers, right? And we're going to exceed FY22 and FY23, but not by much. We aren't going to hit the 255. It's going to be like 210. And most of that comes from the markets and when purchasers are harvesting. That's why in 2018, when they harvested an all-time high, 315 million board feet, nobody was expecting that, but nobody complained about that either. But during that time, we implemented midterm payments in all our timber sale contracts. Purchasers didn't complain about it during that time. Took a little bit to get our internal districts to start implementing it, but we knew we'd be in this time frame now. And we knew those revenues would be important. So those are the steps that we've been taking to try to even out the ups and downs of the booms and busts. But that's where those projections come from. When we do the projections, we actually get billed subject matter experts that weighs in on those dates and the projections before we send those out. So we'll get the information out of our database on the planned and sold timber sales and expiration date. Send those out back to the field. Here's the volume that you have remaining. Here's the value that you have remaining on those contracts. And here's the time frame that we're predicting that those to come in. Does this make sense? Because they might know something on the ground that maybe a road washed out, maybe something else is going on with an operator, or maybe the sales underrunning or overrunning, and so they can make adjustments. So we send our projections back out to the subject matter experts so they can weigh in at the field level before we finalize them and send them back out to the counties.
If I can chime in just for a second, sorry, Mike. So for what you showed there, I think the dates were like 2018 through 21. And I think this is a great example of 2018 where it spiked, which is almost that 100 million board feet we saw in Tillamook County come in.
Mm-hmm.
And then we saw the fires and the salvage. We were still selling sales with expiration dates. And so, you know, from what Kevin was saying, we're still selling sales. We know what they are. But again, those factors that Kevin talked through earlier of operators, of the salvage process, our expectation in a lot of ways with that volume and value was still coming in. The operators have decided, or the companies or other landowners have made different priority choices that just didn't get reflected there as well.
And are we still expecting all those sold to be cut? That was one of the conversations we've had. Is Tillamook expecting a big bubble to arrive that although we're talking about going forward 18.1 million, 69 board feet, so that if we were to say, starting with what's being sold today, looking out to our future, we should look at that 69.7 as our even flow and that 18.1, knowing that revenue is going to change. But if we had to choose something, the 18.1, which gives us generally about 4.5 at the Tillamook, which is the number we were using, but that we should expect a bubble in the next 3 years as these short years, particularly 2022, which only saw the harvest of 46.7 million board feet, and 2023, which only saw the harvest of 65, that we should still expect to see some extra millions over the next 2 years, because those are sales that were sold 2 years ago and 3 years ago. Did that make sense? Sorry, it's kind of complicated in my head.
Makes sense.
Yeah, we should. So one of the things is, you know, we do have requirements in our contract. When we put it out there, it's not just a matter of, you know, if it's convenient to cut, right? We have our own objectives associated with it, silvicultural objectives as well as monetary. And so we do expect those operations to be completed. So that money should come in. And the more it's been compressed like this, the more of a bubble that you will get off of that. Because purchasers don't like to default on our timber sale contracts. That really inhibits their ability to buy more. So I think that really they've got that planned out, and I can't speak, and I don't think it's wise for us to try to, you know, even future out what any given purchasers might do.
Although if we looked at the slide that had 24, 25, 26, it's in there. Is that right? Would it be in there because their sales sold an expected timeline?
Yes.
So repeat that again.
So you had a slide that showed what you expected for 24, expected for 25, and expected for 26 and 27, right? And so that's what's tucked in there, right?
Right. I would say it's more of this volume under contract. So that was from the projection. And so those out years actually had more volume in them than I think we'll be doing a new revenue projection. So the Corley County projection, I'll send out April 1st. So I got it ready. It'll be going out Monday, right? So
sneak preview for us. We
on Monday,
everything.
On Monday, I'll be sending it out the quarterly cash analysis. And so that's a 12-month rolling forecast. July 1st, we'll be sending out the next quarterly county cash analysis, right? But that will actually also be the FY 25 projection that gets published in the CFTLC annual report and shared in November. And so that'll have the outer years with the new numbers in them. And so those out years that you saw earlier will be updated, and I expect them to be lower.
To be lower?
Lower than what they were in FY 24, yes.
Oh, okay.
Just because the historic, right? So the last 5-year average, we were around 240 million statewide. And the last 2 years, we've been around that 200. So I expect our volumes to more reflect reality in the outer years.
Yeah, if I could speak to this. So I think there's always going to be a challenge, though, when translating this, especially down to the local taxing district, special district level. And that's just because the amount of available area for, so if a person's, in some of these districts being small, there maybe is one sale in there. And if a purchaser puts off harvesting that sale, then it's kind of like, oh, okay. And that's, so the localized effect can be a lot greater percentage wise on those individual budgets. And, you know, some folks are, you know, we always wonder how can we get more of a steady payment schedule. The midpoint payments have been a success, and that's good. There is a danger, though, to putting purchasers on too much of a payment schedule and forcing the harvest at a certain rate, because we get a better bid price if they've got some flexibility. So over the long haul, it definitely behooves us to give them some flexibility in when they time their harvest. And especially with local operators now being in ever shorter supply.
Right. So one of the conversations Kate and I had, I know Sean and I have had this too, is there any way to have a little bit more transparency into what's underneath that number when it comes? Because we get the number, like the first, we got the 8 million last year in April, and then it became 6 million when we got it in July after budgets were adopted. And I think we just get the number. I don't think we get like, here's the board feet that we think are underneath that, or here's the sales. Kate and I were talking about this. Is there any way to get a little more ground truthing underneath it that we can see that helps us be able to sort of touch locally and go, oh, actually, I know that operator and they're not harvesting that when you had hoped they would, for us to have, you know, a little bit just more local knowledge. I know that I realize it's complicated, but I can't hurt to ask, right? You can
Send me
only
an
say
email
no.
and ask what specific you're wanting.
Okay.
So I don't have the operators, I have the purchasers, right? So the
Purchasers would
purchasers
work.
sub out the contracting. So I do have the purchasers and the volume remaining under contract and value. Yeah, and the planned sales, but
I think that would be helpful just for us to understand each quarter what you've put underneath it, because before you know that it's not happening, we probably know that it's not happening in Tillamook County, right? So it just be helpful, I think, looking at Sean, I think that's what she's asked me if we could get before. It's just a little bit more detail underneath it so that, you know, we know what adjustments we might need to make.
sure, and that might be something what we look at doing public. I think Washington DNR keeps that information under out on the web-based. But anyway.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we've been through various iterations over the years of how much detail we presented in certain reports,
Yeah.
including the county report and our report to DSL as well for Common School Forest Lands. And I think it's probably a fruitful discussion to carry forward into FTLAC is to sort of like what specific information is enough to provide that would also be consistent with whatever we're providing in quarterly. Because that, you know, we've been producing that report for a while, and then Brandon asked me the question recently.
Yeah.
And I'm like, the board feet aren't in there. The money is.
Right.
And that was something that was deliberately done, you know, a few years, or I don't know how many years ago it was, but we can certainly change that back because I think the detail is good for folks to know.
Yeah, thank you. I think we'd appreciate that.
Anything else, commissioners?
No, I thank them for coming, and I thank Commissioner Scar for setting this up, because this rose to the top of the list here all of a sudden, as you well know, and when it was voted, and I know there people get to weigh in. There was a large environmental effort, and then there were others that wanted to strike a different balance, and I don't think we're done with this at all. You know, as I mentioned, you have a lawsuit now, and maybe that'll go somewhere, maybe not, but you know, we're a pretty integral part of it, and there's 27,000 people here that have, in one way or another, depending on the revenue, not just to the county, but 16 of our 21 special districts get money from the forest. So it, you know, it's more than just a renaming a creek like we did earlier today. It's a big deal. So I appreciate the fact that you came down here and forthright answers, and thank you.
Thank you. And I do as well. You know, it's been a challenging process and, you know, I know at FTLAC and we're looking at how do we move forward? How do we come together now that we have an HCP and figure out what it really means for each county? How does each county begin to really make their plans going forward? And then how do we extend and include the county voice in the next steps that come, right? And I think these conversations help us do that. It's just a chance for everybody to actually have a face and be a person and to have, you know, conversation, and for us to move in Tillamook County from this is that broad perspective of 30%, oh my gosh, to let's talk about Tillamook County, what's real for here. So having that 69.7 number and the 18.1 for revenue, it at least gives us a number that you all are sitting in front of us nodding and saying, that is the best estimate we can give you, and it allows us to jump off from that space. So I appreciate that very much.
As do I. Thank you very much for being here. I'm grateful for your time. I'm grateful for your expertise. I'm grateful for your partnership, Kate. And I think this is helpful because we're obviously all in the same situation. We are, and you are in the same situation of trying to figure out how do we budget moving forward and what's really going to happen. And I'm grateful for the scenario that you proposed, the non-declining even flow scenario. And because that's what we need. You know, we'll run that through the treasurer, of course, but that's what we need. We need some idea of what we can expect moving forward. And so this is very helpful to us. And thank you. Thanks for spending your entire morning with us here in Tillamook County. And yeah, we can't thank you enough.
Thank you for having us anytime, really.
Okay. Well, be careful what you say.
And,
I do a monthly report.
If I can just take a second as well, I wanted to thank Debbie. So she's been helping me get a lot of dates on the calendars, and we're still shooting
Good.
for a state forest tour in the spring
Great.
or fall. And so we'll still work on that. And I just wanted to call her out and say thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, we're a hard bunch to corral. So thank you, Debbie.
All right. Well, commissioners, let's take a brief recess. It is,
Commissioner,
Yep.
we have one item we didn't get to for the,
oh, Isabel.
do you want to bring her back?
I know, I thought we should recess before that for 5 minutes or no?
I would set session.
Okay.
And then we'll take a break.
Okay. All right.
It always takes us a while to shift.
Okay, Isabel, we are back on item 16, which is consideration of an order in the matter of the reappointment of a member to the Tillamook County Tourism Advisory Committee. Isabel Gilda, Executive Assistant.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you. So regarding the reappointment of a member to the Tillamook the Tourism Advisory Committee, a little information on the committee. It's also known as the TAC. The Board of Commissioners is responsible for the distribution of the county's transient lodging tax TLT funds for tourism-related destination management and facilities. And in 2015, the county created a TLT grant program to fund county and non-county entities on tourism-related projects. And this is where the committee came in. The county, in partnership with the Tillamook Coast Visitors Association, manages this tourism-related grant application process. So the TAC, the committee, has 9 members and is comprised of community members who serve on a volunteer basis, and they are tasked with reviewing, scoring, and ranking the tourism-related grant applications. The committee is made up of transient lodging providers, so 3 and 5 citizens at large, and from the citizens at large represent from North to South County. So they have a broad representation, and we have 1 city manager, mayor. Rick Lofton is being reappointed today or under consideration for reappointment. Rick is a citizen at large, and he represents Central Tillamook County. He's volunteered on the committee since 2020, and this would be his 2nd reappointment. He's a highly valued committee member and recommended for reappointment. He's actively engaged in every grant application, and Nan Devlin, the executive director of the Tillamook Coast Visitors Association, said he brings a lot of information to the table as a contractor. Yeah, so he can look at the grant applications and has a more realistic understanding of these projects. So for your consideration is the board order to reappoint Rick for another 3-year term to the Tourism Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Isabel. Commissioners, any questions, comments?
No, I would say again that tourism is a substantial part of what goes on in this county, and these people give of their time to point people in the right direction and offer their opinions. So let's get it done.
Thank you.
I agree. I appreciate all of our volunteers and the work that they do. And I think, if Rick, it sounds like he's been engaged and enjoying this, we should have him continue.
I agree. I'm grateful that Rick is willing to continue. So I think we're ready for a motion.
Madam Chair, in consideration of Board Order 24-013 in the matter of the reappointment of a member to the Tillamook County Tourism Advisory Committee, the TAC, I move approval.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes. Thank you, Isabel.
Commissioners,
Okay, now we are going into executive session under ORS.
192-660-2E.
Thank you, Bill. At 11:29, and we will recess this meeting for 5 minutes. We'll come back into executive session.
Madam Chair, we have recessed. We are going into executive session. That's all you need to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
At 11:29, as you stated.
All right.